And we're live. Welcome to episode 1, the pilot of Halftime with Harmon. I'm Matt Harmon, representing the Yahoo fantasy team. As you could tell, Halftime with Harmon, it would only make sense that I am Matt Harmon. And it is halftime or thereabouts of week 4 of the preseason. By far the most meaningless of all the preseason games, that is true. Nevertheless, we are here to talk all things NFL, all things fantasy football, as we ready you for the coming season. It's 1 week. 1 week from today, we are going to have a real game that matters, where the points are real. Your fantasy lineups, you're really going to be tilting over them unless you're one of these sickos that plays preseason DFS. And if you are, that's fine. I actually admire you. Wish I could be out there on the front lines with you, but I've got to be here hosting a show. Halftime with Harmon. This is the show. We're doing it right now. So we're going to run through just kind of every single game that's going on right now, pluck out some of the major fantasy takeaways from the games that are actually happening, and we'll just also talk the teams in general, and you guys can chat along with us in the live stream. That is going to be the exciting part of it. I'll be able to take your questions. You guys can ask me about my tiers. You can find those on Twitter at MattHarmon_BYB. The rankings I've put out there. You can ask me about the games that are going on. You guys can ask me about literally everything. But right now we're going to just pluck into these games right here. If you can see it on the desktop, that should be on your screen as well. You guys can literally see my computer. Very exciting stuff. This is awesome. I mean, technology here in the year 2018. First game we're going to look at right now is the Miami Dolphins 24-0 over the Atlanta Falcons. I would not wager this is what it will look like in real life. But the interesting part of this game, and I say interesting with quotes, is the Miami Dolphins right now, they've got kind of a backup quarterback battle going on. Obviously Ryan Tannehill entrenched as the starter, missed last season with an ACL injury. Jay Cutler is gone. He's out of our lives. He's actually on the reality TV show with his wife, Very Cavallari, which is a horrible, horrible show. But you can watch some of the fun clips of Jay Cutler out there. But the interesting part about this, Brock Osweiler, I have given Brock Osweiler grief pretty much since he hit the scene. He was very much on my radar as one of those guys that, he was the backup quarterback that everybody wanted to trade picks for, but he obviously wasn't good. And he does indeed suck. He's not good. But he's balling out in this game right now. Actually, 105 yards, a touchdown. He went 11 for 14. It looks like he's probably going to be the backup quarterback. Now, obviously, that's not really relevant for your fantasy teams unless Ryan Tannehill gets hurt, which is possible. He's missed a lot of time already with an ACL injury. Brock Osweiler would most likely, I'd bet after this game, be the guy who replaces him. And that would mean something for your fantasy teams if you're invested in guys. Well, you shouldn't be invested in Devontae Parker. Don't take Devontae Parker in drafts. That's not going to happen. But Kenny Stills is a sleeper that I've been targeting, heavily all offseason. He's been undervalued as like an 11th, 12th round pick in most half PPR drafts. 12-teamers. I've been hammering him, and if Ryan Tannehill gets hurt for any reason, I want to know who's the backup quarterback on this roster. Albert Wilson, one of my favorite sleepers pretty much for years now. He's on the Dolphins, and he's a guy I've been drafting in the super late rounds of best ball drafts. He's somebody that I'm looking at. So I want to know who the backup quarterback is in Miami, and it looks like it's probably going to be Brock Osweiler based on this game. Not too much else interesting to talk about on the Dolphins side. Kalen Ballage is out there, 4 for 25, scored a touchdown. Ballage is probably fighting for a roster spot, but people were coming into this offseason thinking that Ballage might be a guy who pushed for touches behind Kenyon Drake. That's not going to happen. Ballage is not good. He has not put any heat on Kenyon Drake as the starting running back, which I think if anybody actually watched him in college, they would know that was the case. But Ballage is clearly kind of fighting for he might make the roster based on this performance, but Drake is entrenched right now as a real feature back and somebody I've been taking in the 4th round with glee. I'm not taking a lot of running backs in that area of the draft, but this is an area where I'm definitely willing to target Kenyon Drake. Joe Mixon, a player that I've written about, you can find it on yahoo.com/fantasyfootball. The article that I talked about why I'm fading Joe Mixon. I really see Mixon and Kenyon Drake as similar bets. And Drake is a guy that I think has just as good of an outlook as Mixon, but their price is vastly different. Mixon, a 2nd-round pick. Kenyon Drake, a 4th-round pick. But I think, Balaj is kind of fighting for the roster spot there. Not much of note on the Falcons side in this game. We're looking at goofballs like Malik Williams. I don't even know who that is. A lot of players that, frankly, just probably aren't going to make a big difference. The Falcons are really solidified right now on offense. If you're taking them in fantasy football, you pretty much know what you're getting yourself into with the Atlanta Falcons. So let's move on to another game. Cincinnati 20, Indianapolis 7. I was watching this one a fair bit before we went live. This one actually had some interesting notes. Obviously, we've got some players on the Colts that we are familiar with. Jacoby Brissett started last season, except that one game where they started Scott Tolzien, which was a predictable disaster. Brissett played a little bit in this game. If you've watched him this preseason, you've seen that he has really stood in under pressure. This Colts line, as much as they have invested in the unit, is still allowing a lot of pressure. Jacoby Brissett there took the start, but the interesting note is Christine Michael. Look, I know you guys don't want to hear about it. Everybody hates Christine Michael, but he's still a thing. He's still taking snaps here. Ripped off a nice pass reception. He's caught a fair amount of passes this preseason. He's still out there, had a catch for 20 yards, and, he's got explosion. This guy's probably going to make the roster, I would expect, and he has a shot to start week 1. With Marlon Mack suffered from a hamstring injury that has pretty much kept him out of most of the preseason action. Jordan Wilkins they've used sparingly with the first team, but not a guy that they've been willing to just rush on out there. Robert Turbin is suspended to start the year. Nyheim Hines was someone that people expected to be a big-time sleeper, but has not been to this point. He has been kind of an underperformer in preseason action. He's someone that needs to do a lot to be relevant. I think Christine Michael has a shot to be relevant in this backfield, and he's a super deep sleeper who should be on your radar in very advanced leagues that have deep rosters and deep benches. You could probably draft him, but other than that, you can leave him to the waiver wire, and if he gets a big role, then you take him on later. On the Bengals side, John Ross, he continues to run out there. He only had one target, but it was a deep, deep pass. He drew a pass interference play. We know these deep threats, they often are used as simple decoys that can draw those pass interference plays. Ross is coming on this year. He's a guy who didn't catch a pass in his rookie season. He actually finished the season with negative fantasy points. I bet you didn't even know that's a real thing. But, yeah, he got negative fantasy points, but I think he's going to have a good season. He's like a 12th-round pick at this point. He's probably going to run out there with the starting group. I really like taking Ross in that 11th to 12th round range, a guy that I'm personally chasing. So that game has definitely some fantasy relevant takeaways. Moving on to the next one, another one where we've got some fantasy relevant takeaways. The Cleveland Browns versus Detroit Lions. Cleveland 25 over Detroit with the 0 bomb there. Obviously, the big story is Baker Mayfield started this game. If you all have watched Hard Knocks, you have definitely got the sense that this is a strange operation in Cleveland, how this team is being run. Mike Lombardi, who hosts the Ringer GM Street podcast, he used to work in Cleveland. You can think what you want of Lombardi, with the Doug Peterson call that was obviously incorrect, where he said he was, not qualified to be a head coach or whatever. Lombardi knows the NFL, and he said that this is a strangely run operation. And obviously, one of the bigger takeaways from this offseason with Cleveland is they really haven't allowed Baker Mayfield to even compete for the starting job. Don't think he's taken any first-team reps in camp. Tyrod Taylor has run, or Tyrod Taylor, excuse me. That is official now, I guess. He has been the starter throughout preseason. Mayfield starts this game, completes 56% of his passes here at halftime. Mayfield's not going to get a lot of run this year, I think. Tyrod Taylor, I've been a Tyrod Taylor fan since he was at Virginia Tech. My older sister and her husband actually graduated Virginia Tech, so I've been a big fan of that team for a long time, especially Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod, God, it's really hard to mix up the Tyrod thing. It's hard to not just call him Tyrod. I have for years. But, he's been a guy that I've really liked for a long time, and I think he's going to be a good player this year. Obviously with quarterbacks in fantasy, it's the most replaceable position out there. I have been willing to, not in best ball leagues where you don't get to tinker with the roster throughout the year, but in seasonal redraft leagues, if I'm really, really waiting on the quarterback position, I've definitely targeted Tyrod Taylor because I think this offense is loaded. Obviously, Jarvis Landry is a guy that I've really warmed up to as a top target getter in that offense. Josh Gordon is back with the team. I expect him to potentially get off to a slow start. He's already got some hamstring injuries because he missed a chunk of time in the offseason, taking care of his personal battles, which he should do, which he has every right to do. But, this offense with David Njoku he's a big-time breakout candidate. I've really liked taking Tyrod Taylor as a streaming quarterback. You're not going to get attached to him because he could get yanked for Baker Mayfield at any point. But for right now, he's locked in as the starter. That has been clear throughout preseason. And I think they could get off to a nice start with Pittsburgh in week 1. That should be a high-scoring game with Pittsburgh's offense. Then they face the Saints in week 2. We know that one could definitely be a pass-heavy game script because the Saints have an explosive offense. They always drag teams into shootouts down there in the Superdome. So I like Tyrod Taylor. Obviously, Baker Mayfield I think has a great long-term future, a player I'm really, really high on going forward. But for this year, I think Tyrod makes for a decent streaming quarterback. The other takeaway, too, in this game, Nick Chubb, I think this was the best he looked. Again, this is facing guys who's not going to make the roster, but Nick Chubb looked explosive. He looked decisive. That's been kind of the talk out of the Browns as they thought he was just a little too hesitant as a rookie runner. But he looked decisive in this game. He's not going to put a lot of pressure on Carlos Hyde because Carlos Hyde, look, let me tell you, I've been fading this guy all offseason. Comes out and has a dynamic, literally a dynamic preseason. He's been one of the best runners in the exhibition contest so far. He's shot up to a 5th-round pick in fantasy, and I kind of think he's worth it. But Chubb is a really, really talented runner. My good friend Matt Waldman, who writes for Football Guys and does the rookie scouting portfolio, if you don't buy the rookie scouting portfolio, you're doing fantasy football wrong. You're doing football analysis and football fandom wrong if you're not buying the rookie scouting portfolio. He actually graded Nick Chubb higher than Saquon Barkley. Actually assigned a higher grade to Nick Chubb than many running backs that have come out recently. So I respect Waldman's opinion, probably more than any tape evaluator out there, especially at the running back position. And Chubb is a guy he really likes. So I'm paying attention to Chubb this year, really liking his prospects. But for the first couple of weeks of the season until he falters, I think Carlos Hyde is going to be the guy. So remember, we're on right now. We're looking at some of the box scores on Yahoo. #halftime with Harmon. If you want to tweet at me, I will talk to you about literally whatever. If you're talking in the chat right now, we're going to get to some questions later. If my production crew, the crack team we've got here, is able to hook that up, we're going to definitely take some of your questions. But moving on to the next game, we're going to talk New England Patriots, New York Giants, 3-6, New England to New York. Obviously this is a Super Bowl revenge game from several years ago, but jokes only, for real. This is obviously, way stripped down version of what we're going to see from these two teams. The one place I'm paying attention to is Wayne Gallman, backup running back for the New York Giants. He's a guy who played well last year in the passing game, especially. Wayne Gallman had several games where he was really involved with some decent catch totals. This backup spot in New York is interesting. Saquon Barkley, obviously, the number 2 overall pick in the NFL draft, a first-round pick in fantasy football drafts across any format you can think of. He's a guy who's going really high, but that backup spot is in question. Look, if you guys know me, followed my work for a long time, I am in a complicated relationship with the Carolina Panthers. Their former running back, Jonathan Stewart, is now the number 2 in New York. I'm telling you guys right now, Jonathan Stewart doesn't really have much left in the tank. But he's a guy that could break down at any point. Gallman might be somebody that we're interested in as a handcuff later in the season. So he's someone to watch, and he's definitely worth paying attention to in the preseason. And he's had a good exhibition season. He's not a guy that anybody was super, super high on coming into the year. Or into the NFL, especially from Clemson, even though it's a big-time program. He wasn't anybody's favorite running back or anything, but he's shown well as a pro. I'm going to take a brief moment for some self-promotion here and just retweet this post to my little followers on the internet. That's probably something I should have done to start the broadcast, but hey, here we are. We're making it work together. All right, we're going to move on to the next game because there's really not too much interesting going on with either one of those two teams. We talked about those complicated Carolina Panthers. Let's check in on Carolina. Shout out to Taylor Heineke, 68 yards and a touchdown. If you followed me over at the NFL Fantasy Live podcast, before coming over here to Yahoo, I told this story, and I'll tell it a little bit here. My younger sister graduated from Old Dominion University, where Taylor Heineke went to school. They were actually friends their freshman year. So it's pretty crazy to now see the guy. Great story. Overcame the death of his dad in college and led that team as a starting quarterback. Now he's here, taking snaps with the Carolina Panthers in the preseason. Has a pretty decent shot to be the backup quarterback on this team. This is another spot where the Panthers had Derek Anderson kind of entrenched for a long, long time now. And they decided to go in a different direction this year, didn't get an established backup or anything. And now we've got Taylor Heineke here, potentially the backup quarterback for the Carolina Panthers in Norv Turner's offense. That's interesting to watch. Cam Newton obviously is durable. He hasn't missed much time in his NFL career, despite people, wringing their hands about his running style. He's been out there. He's been playing. So maybe we don't need to pay attention to the backup, but had to tell that personal anecdote there. The other interesting note here, Cameron Artis-Payne, 5 carries for 35 yards in this contest. He has been a guy who's been in competition with C.J. Anderson. Several of our analysts at Yahoo, Brad Evans, Liz Loza, they really liked C.J. Anderson kind of coming into this process. I was personally a little conflicted about what I thought Anderson would be in Carolina. Still expected Christian McCaffrey to be the starter and lead the team in carries, but certainly did not expect the discrepancy between the two in the preseason. He has been really out there as the number one, that being Christian McCaffrey, the clear bell cow back. He's been on over 90% of the first team snaps in the preseason. Obviously, he didn't play tonight, but McCaffrey has gone from like a mid-third round pick to a clear first-round pick in fantasy. End of first rounds he's been going in. That's the type of jump he's taken. McCaffrey is a guy who, if you can get him in the second round, you should be really happy about that as a fantasy owner. C.J. Anderson, I don't think he's going to play in this game, but he has certainly been somebody that you got to pay attention to. All right, we're going to take some questions right now from you guys. One question we got here, Kenneth Dixon or Buck Allen for the Ravens kind of number 2 job? This one is actually a really good question. It's perfectly fitted for here, week 4 of the preseason. I'm personally going to go with Buck Allen here if I had to pick right now. Kenneth Dixon has made some noise in the preseason. He's looked good. He's looked somewhat like the runner many people expected him to be coming out of college. He was a talented back out of Louisiana Tech, was a pass catcher, a good elusive runner. But at the same time, I really think they trust Javorius Allen, Buck Allen there in Baltimore. He's a good pass catcher. He's a solid receiver. He's not anything special as a runner, but he is somebody that the team trusts. And at that backup running back spot, I do think that you really want to trust the guy that you have there. He is kind of like the poor, he's not like Theo Riddick, really, because he is a better runner, I think, but he is somebody that the team trusts as an outlet receiver. So I'm going to go with Buck Allen there. Getting back to this game here, too, with the Steelers, and we'll take some more questions if you have them. Shoot them our way, and the crackpot team here for halftime with Harmon will get them to me. One guy I want to highlight on the Carolina Panthers side, too, Curtis Samuel. Curtis Samuel was a second-round pick of the team last year when they were trying to get more explosive on offense. They threw Samuel out there as kind of a sort of hybrid player, as a guy who could contribute in the rush game, could contribute in the pass game. And he was obviously injured most of last season, was injured in camp. Then when he really looked like he was coming on in that Monday night game in Miami there, he got injured again. It was a tough blow for Samuel in his rookie year, but I think he's a talented player. And what the big takeaway by the fact that he's had a good preseason, that he's looked good, this is the best staff, not the best supporting cast that Cam Newton has ever had in his NFL career, bar none to me. Think about the days when we were getting excited about frickin' Armonte Edwards. David Geddes, for God's sakes, was like a sleeper. We've got legit talent around Cam Newton this year. He has an entrenched number one receiver in Devin Funchess. He has a first-round pick in DJ Moore, a guy I interviewed coming into the draft. Really talented guy. Chris Wessling, one of the best football evaluators to me, former NFL colleague. He is a guy who compared DJ Moore to Percy Harvin. I thought that was an interesting comparison. I think he's more Golden Tate-like as a route runner, but that's obviously something that Cam Newton's never had in his career. He's got Christian McCaffrey coming in the backfield, really talented pass catcher. Greg Olsen is established as a strong tight end, even as he ages, as long as he can stay healthy. We've got Torrey Smith, Jarius Wright. Curtis Samuel is kind of like icing on the cake for this team. He might be a guy who sees like 30, 40 targets this year, but he's a legit explosive weapon. To me, this all leads back to the pancakes here and all the syrup on it with all the sweetener of all these weapons. The pancakes, Cam Newton. You want to take Cam Newton in fantasy drafts this year. You want to be aggressive with him. I've been a guy who I've been taking him in drafts earlier than I would normally take my quarterback. When other people are waiting to take their starting quarterback till like round 13, round 14, I'm taking Cam Newton in the 10th round. I'm feeling really good about it. We had a couple questions come in during my big soliloquy about the Carolina Panthers there. One was thoughts on Deshaun Watson. Look, Watson's overpriced to me this year. Going as like the clear QB2 in ADP, I'm fading at that price. I think that Watson is good. I mean, legit good. Really smart guy, fun to talk to. I got a chance to meet him a couple weeks ago. I like Deshaun Watson a lot. I think he's going to be one of the best young quarterbacks going forward in the NFL. But I'm fading him in fantasy this year pretty much just because I think his touchdown rate is going to regress. 9.3 touchdown percentage, that's going to fall back. He's not going to throw as many touchdowns this year, at least at that high of a clip. He's going to play 16 games, we hope, but I don't expect him to be the clear every week advantage. And he was a guy who, people don't want to admit this, but he threw himself into a lot of those holdouts to start his career. But going forward, this year, they get a lot of players back on defense. I mean, J.J. Watt, ever heard of him? He's good. They'll get Whitney Merciless back. They'll get a handful of these defensive players back. Romeo Crennel, I think, is actually a better defensive coordinator than Mike Vrabel. But I do think that as this team gets better, they'll be more run-focused. They won't be in those shootouts. I think Watson's overvalued in fantasy. I talked about Cam Newton earlier. He goes behind him in pretty much every draft. I would take Cam Newton over Deshaun Watson, and I have done so regularly this year. Another question we got in was about another Baltimore running back, Alex Collins. I like Alex Collins an awful lot this year. The Ravens, defensive-focused group. They are someone that they trusted Alex Collins last year more and more as the year went on. I like Alex Collins as an explosive runner, consistently breaks tackles, consistently gains yards after contact. And while Kenneth Dixon is interesting, while Buck Allen is a trusted pass catcher, as I mentioned earlier, Alex Collins has shown feature back ability. He is a guy who's shown that he can run over defenders. He can keep an offense on schedule. I like taking Alex Collins an awful lot at the end of the third round, in the early fourth round. If you can get him as an RB2 or even a low-end RB1 on a wide receiver-heavy team, I really like that. I think he's a good fantasy pick this year, no doubt about it. One of the other questions we got was about Kenyon Drake, who we mentioned earlier. I'm a big Kenyon Drake fan. I worked a lot with the Next Gen Stats player tracking data at the NFL Network before I left to come over here at Yahoo. And one of the stats that we measured was one called yards gained after close, which is literally just when a defender gets within a yard of the running back, how many yards do they gain after those attempts, which is basically going to measure running back elusiveness, for lack of a better word. Kenyon Drake was a stud in that. He gained 4.55 yards after defenders got within 1 yard of him, which was one of the best marks to end last year. Top 5 in the NFL in the second half of the season. You didn't even need that stat, though, to know that he's good. When you watch him run last year against the Patriots in that Monday night upset, you could see he had feature back ability to carry the load, to run through and around defenders, and he also has good pass catching ability too. Adam Gase said that he wants to get him 25 to 30 touches a game. That's not going to happen. That's not realistic. We don't have to trust these coaches with the exact amount that they want to get the players, but that does show you that they're committed to him as a feature back. Frank Gore's there. Frank Gore's gonna chip in here and there, but this is going to be the Kenyon Drake show. He's a guy I think is going to be a breakout running back. I think he gets over 1,000 total yards, and I think he is a fine pick in the 4th round if you can get him there. If we don't have any more hot take questions right now, I am going to just jump back into a couple more games here before we cut out of episode 1 of Halftime with Harmon. Remember, use the hashtag Halftime with Harmon, and I can answer some questions after we get off on either my personal Twitter handle at @MattHarmon_BYB, or we could chip in over the Yahoo Fantasy handle at Yahoo Fantasy. So, a couple more games here. Let's check in on Jacksonville, Tampa Bay. Jacksonville, Tampa Bay, exciting. Wow, nothing's going on. Okay, let's not check in over there. That's a boring game. Again, a lot of these contests right now, we're not so much interested in what's going on in the game. We want to think about what this might mean for the regular season. We've talked a lot about Baltimore, but let's talk a little bit about Washington here. They've got 7 points against Ravens 13. You see their backup running back job. If you needed proof that Adrian Peterson is going to be the starting running back for Washington, this is it. You've got Rob Kelly out there with 9 carries. You've got Samaje Perine out there with 5 carries. Rob Kelly looks like he's also chipped in with a couple of catches. Brian Quick getting in the end zone. Shout out to Brian Quick, ghost from fantasy leagues past. These two guys are depth players, Perine and Kelly. Perine lost a fumble tonight. He might not even make the roster. Capri Bibbs, who's more versatile as a pass catcher, might make it over Samaje Perine, who also had some injury issues earlier in the preseason. Adrian Peterson is going to be the starter of this team. No question to me. Peterson, as gross as it feels, is a good fantasy pick in the 8th to 9th round of drafts. Especially, I think, if you start with a wide receiver heavy approach where you're targeting guys like Julio Jones and Michael Thomas at the 1-2 turn early in drafts. You'll look at Peterson as a guy who can start hot, who can start with a fever for Washington. The schedule is light to start the year for Washington, and I think Peterson could rip up some of these run defenses like the Colts that they faced in the first few weeks of the season. Washington has a good offensive line with Brandon Sheriff, Trent Williams, Morgan Moses, guys really all across the line, young, talented players and some experience with Williams. This is a much, much better situation than we saw Peterson dropped in last year in Arizona behind a just awful offensive line and, putrid quarterback play. Alex Smith, I think, stabilizes this Washington offense. I think they're a pretty explosive unit. I like Jay Gruden as a play caller, maybe not so much as a head coach, but definitely a play caller. And I think that Peterson really could rip it up this year. Again, he's not going to be vintage RB1 Adrian Peterson for your fantasy teams, but he is definitely going to be someone that takes this starting job, maybe approaches 180, 200 carries. And at that point in the draft, you're just not getting that kind of value. So Peterson, to me, the big takeaway, he's obviously not out there. These two guys, Kelly and Perine, are. And that's the big takeaway to me. Peterson, it's disgusting to say it. I feel like I'm living in a past life. But Adrian Peterson is going to be a good fantasy pick this year in the year 2018. Let's check in on just a few stat leaders before we get out of here tonight with the pilot edition of Halftime with Harmon. Thanks again to everybody that tuned in. Be checking in all season with us. We are going to be doing this a lot. We're going to be doing this live on Sundays, and you guys are going to be checking in. We're going to really talk about some games that actually matter, some fantasy players that are actually important. One last note, I'm looking at the receiving yardage leaders, and right here, number 3, I see Cam Meredith, 1 catch for 56 yards on his lone target of the night. This makes me have some mixed emotions, man, because let me tell you, Cameron Meredith was a guy that I really liked going into the 2017 season after a nice finish to 2016 with the Chicago Bears. Expected him to have a breakout season last year, was hammering him as like a 6th, 7th round pick last year. His reception perception, the receiver charting methodology that I run, showed that he could win outside versus man coverage and inside the slot against zone coverage. Very versatile player. Thought he was in line for a big, big season with the New Orleans Saints. Now I'm backing off a little bit. Obviously, it's great he had a 56-yard reception, but the big question, what's he doing out here in the preseason, week 4, with some of these other jokers? Guys that are fighting to make the roster. That's the question with Meredith right now. Where does he stand in his offense? Where is his health? It brings back some flashes to Willie Snead. Willie Snead, he was a guy who looked like he was in position. He was in position to be that slot receiver, gobble up targets, catches, and yards out of the slot last year. He was played deep into the preseason. That was the first warning sign. Then obviously week 1, he gets slammed with a 3-game suspension, never comes back into the fold. Cameron Meredith out here again. He has not caught a pass from Drew Brees all preseason. He's out here in week 4 playing with some of the reserve guys. I don't know about this. It's making me a little nervous about Cam Meredith, a guy who I thought was in a great position down here, changing teams to New Orleans, a team that has got a lot of production out of that big slot position. Thought Cam Meredith was in a good spot. Now I'm a little worried. He's a guy I've kind of backed off drafting, even though I was drafting him very heavily, but still have hopes because I think he's a talented player. All right, everybody. I think that is going to do it for the first edition, the pilot episode of Halftime with Harmon. Remember, if you use the hashtag on Twitter, hashtag Halftime with Harmon, I will tweet back at you. We can talk fantasy, we can talk beer, we can talk dogs, we can talk real life situations, whatever you guys want to talk about. Hashtag Halftime with Harmon. We're going to see you back here all season, and that's going to do it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in.